This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.
Good afternoon. My name is Gabriela Galindo. I am a reporter covering food and agriculture, and you are watching Politico Live, the live extension of Politico's unbiased journalism. I'm coming to you from the Residence Palace here in Brussels for the second event of Politico's Drive Sustainable Progress series. Today, we will tackle the subject of new genomic techniques, or NGTs. NGTs are a new generation of genetic modification tools that some seed breeders and the agrochemical industry say that because they are much more precise, they have the potential to make agriculture more climate resilient, less resource intensive, and thus friendlier to the environment. Think drought or pest-resistant crops, or crops that require less fertilizer or have an improved nutritional makeup. So far, only a handful of applications have made it to market. The most prominent among those is perhaps a fortified tomato sold in Japan. So why are we here? Companies are eager to get these new types of crops on the market, but say that the current EU rules are too stringent for them to do so. In 2018, the Court of Justice of the EU ruled that existing laws on genetically modified organisms, which impose strict risk assessment and labeling requirements, should also be applied to NGTs. But last year, the EU Commission said that the GMO rules were not fit for purpose and said it intends to present new tailored legislation next year. However, many NGOs, scientists, as well as small organic farmers warn that there is no reason for these new techniques to fall outside the scope of current GMO rules. They want to see them regulated just as strictly, and they warn that the techniques are far too young for us to fully grasp how they will behave once they are out in the open fields. Moreover, they point out that a gene-edited plant is not, in and of itself, a climate solution, especially at a time when climate uncertainty is becoming more and more the norm. The issue of labeling is also non-negotiable for them, as it would ensure consumer transparency, but also protect the EU's organic and GM-free markets. We will be discussing this and more with our panelists today. But first, let me just go through some quick housekeeping rules. I would like to thank our partner Bayer for making this event possible, and thank our audience as well for joining us online. We would like to make this event as interactive as possible, so you can participate by tweeting about it using the handle @LivePolitico, or asking questions through Slido using the hashtag #DriveEUSustainability. I will prioritize questions which are sent in with a name and an organization so that we know who's speaking, who's asking the question, and so that our viewers and panelists can know as well. You can already share your thoughts and answer the following poll that was presented by Bayer. And the poll is, what expectations do you have regarding the areas in which gene editing can most contribute to addressing societal challenges? The options are reducing the environmental impact of agriculture, address food security concerns, or to help farmers mitigate the effects of climate change. We'll take a look at the results of the poll at the end of our discussion. Before we get started, we'll hear some opening remarks from our partner from Bayer, Frank Terhorst, Head of Strategy and Sustainability at Bayer Crop Science. Mr. Terhorst, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gabriela. And also from my side, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Bayer, I'm very pleased to welcome you to what I'm sure is going to be an insightful discussion about gene editing and its potential contribution towards climate change and food security. Because when we talk about agriculture today, we cannot ignore a topic which unfortunately is high on the current agenda, meaning food security. Beyond the evident humanitarian tragedy resulting from the illegitimate invasion of Ukraine by Russia, this conflict will have global ramifications. Both Russia and the Ukraine are important global agricultural suppliers, and the impediment to harvest and export grains and vegetable oils will not only see food prices further go up, but leave countries, especially in the Middle East, and Northern Africa on the verge of food insecurity as they scramble to procure from alternative sources. Others will therefore have to try to boost productivity in an attempt to prevent further negative implications on the global food system. However, let me be very clear here. Increasing productivity cannot come at the expense of putting further pressure on climate or the environment. Climate change, unfortunately, is already a reality, and we can see the impact everywhere, also for farmers around the world, adding even further pressure on food security and their challenges. Agriculture can play a twofold role in addressing these challenges. It is one of the few sectors actually that can remove greenhouse gas from the atmosphere while at the same time increasing the resilience of the agricultural system and society to climate change. In Europe, agriculture is responsible for about 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. That means that we have not only a responsibility, but also an opportunity to take bold action towards Europe's net zero emission goals. How to get there? In our view, access to innovation is critical. There has never been a more important time for innovation in agriculture. At Bayer, we are committed to delivering better solutions for agriculture to help farmers, consumers, to come to the next and important place. We are also about to celebrate Gregor Mendel's 200-year birthday just next month, the founding father of breeding. The continuous development of breeding tools is a result of an increase in the scientific understanding of the genetics and biology of plants. In fact, thanks to advances in plant breeding, agricultural land use in the EU could be minimized without compromising productivity. In the absence of breeding innovations, agricultural acreage would have expanded by more than 21 million hectares between 2000 and 2020. The limited land use of genetic crops improvements helped the EU to save 4 billion tons of greenhouse gas emission in the same period. And there is potential for further contribute to make Europe the first climate neutral continent. Take, for instance, the example of Endis, a startup company in our strategic investment portfolio, with the company's approach to make use of gene editing microbes to decarbonize the world. With their backup, microbe technology, Endis may be able to replace synthetic fertilizers by 30%, resulting in a reduction of greenhouse gas emission equal to taking 250 million cars off the streets. Gene editing and genome editing, the topic in focus today, is one innovative tool out of a broad breeding toolbox to enable sustainable food and feed production. New genomic techniques allow for targeted changes in the genome of crops that are comparable to changes that might also occur in nature or through conventional breeding. They open up the opportunity to develop plant varieties for farming systems that can increase the sustainability and productivity of farming. Such plant varieties can, for example, offer more resilience to pests and diseases, require less land, water, or reduction of energy consumption. We very much welcome the European Commission's work on these new genomic techniques, acknowledging the potential of these techniques to contribute to the objective of the EU Green Deal, and look forward to the upcoming EU policy initiatives on plants derived from certain new genomic techniques. In our view, there is an urgency to adopt a science-based and proportionate legislation of these new technologies as soon as they can, as soon as possible, to enable the cultivation in the EU, ensure continued trade, and to contribute to Europe's competitiveness in the field of biotechnology. While we are very excited about the potential new genomic techniques and how they can help us addressing societal challenges, we understand that the new technologies can raise questions and concerns. Bayer firmly believes that societal trust in innovation is driven by responsibility and transparency, and therefore is committed to engaging in an open debate about related issues. In conclusion, we believe gene editing has the potential to contribute towards climate change and food security. European agriculture can play a leading role in moving the world towards a more sustainable and resilient food system, but only if we implement policies and practices that put the farmers as well as consumers at the center and that facilitate more agricultural innovation, not less. To achieve this, we must all work together. Thank you for your attention and your interest in today's panel. And now I hand it back to Gabriela, who will lead us through the panel discussion.
Thanks very much, Mr. Terhorst. Now that we have heard from you, I will go over and introduce our speakers. Before we do that, however, I have a little note for our audience. Two of our speakers were unfortunately unable to join us due to unforeseen circumstances. So this is MEP Irène Toléré, a French MEP from Renew, who is also a wine grower, so it would have been really interesting to have her opinion on what kind of innovation she would like to have from NGTs. And the second speaker that couldn't join us today is Mr. Peter Kearns, who is part of the think tank Reimagine Europa, and he was also an OECD advisor working on biotechnology. However, that doesn't mean we don't have, we can still have a very, very interesting and good conversation, because we have two excellent speakers here with us today. So we have Mr. Klaus Behrendt, Acting Director of Food and Feed Safety at the Commission's Health and Food Safety Department. Hello, Mr. Behrendt. Thanks for being here with us. And then we have Dr. Ricarda Steinbrecher, who is an expert on GMOs. She has been working on them since the 90s, and she's part of a EU collective, a EU group of scientists for social responsibility. So thanks, Dr. Steinbrecher, as well, for being here with us today and for participating with this discussion. I guess we can kick off. My first question would be, I would like to hear a bit more about NGTs and their potential to contribute to sustainability, and in particular to the Green Deal and Farm to Fork's objectives. We have just heard a few really hopeful things from Mr. Terhorst about what these techniques can do. And I guess my first question would be to Mr. Behrendt from the Commission. The Commission has said that sustainability is a big aspect or a big potential for these techniques. So we are almost 1 year before, less than 1 year, sorry, before the potential communication from the Commission comes. Can you give us a bit more of a sense of what kind of sustainability definition the Commission has in mind? How will you decide if a potential application of new genomic techniques is sustainable and can contribute to the Green Deal on Farm to Fork? That will be a good for opening.
Yes, hello, Gabriela, and good afternoon to everybody. I don't think I have a final and definitive answer for you on this question, because we are at the moment still conducting our work to prepare the impact assessment that would underpin a proposal if the Commission then eventually made a proposal to the Council and the Parliament. And obviously there are different ways and means in which we could introduce aspects around sustainability into such a proposal. If you, and maybe you had the chance to look at the questions that we are asking about this in the public consultation, that in a way sets out the entire spectrum of possibilities that there is. And also there are questions about what kind of traits and elements would be considered or could or should be considered as defining sustainability. And we are really interested to hear the feedback that we get from all stakeholders and from the general public on that. And the way in which it would come into the legislation or in the proposal for legislation, there are also different ways and possibilities. One would be to provide incentives that give reason for companies to particularly direct their research into traits that contribute to what will then be defined as sustainability. Or it could also become a requirement, so that without fulfilling this or without working in that direction, there would not be access to a different legal framework compared to what is there today. So again, there are various ways in shaping this and in bringing it into any such proposal. But I also want to underline that that's exactly what the Commission will do if in the end we make a proposal that will go to Council and Parliament, and it will be the Parliament and the Council who ultimately decide on how they would wish to address these aspects in the future legislation. And maybe I'll leave it at that for the moment, but obviously we can also maybe in the course of the discussion look into more details.
Thanks. Keeping the mystery there until next year, I see. Perhaps, Dr. Steinbrecher, you can step in here and tell us a bit about what kind of sustainability criteria you would think would be interesting for the Commission to consider from a scientific perspective. What do you think should be like the sustainability checkpoints that any potential NGT hoping to make it into the EU market should respond to? I think you're muted, Dr. Steinbrecher.
You're quite right. I was. Thank you for the question. And just to clarify earlier, like I'm representing the European Network for Scientists for Social and Environmental Responsibility. So therefore, like our questions will, of course, go much further than just like for individual traits or for one particular aspect. But given the task at hand here, I find that the idea of thinking of a trait as the criteria, whether it will contribute to sustainability or will indeed make a difference, is not helpful, because resilience and sustainability grows out of a system. You need to have a farming system that actually enables to protect the crops, to help nutrients to be present, to be water to be present. You have the surrounding that will also repel the insects. So basically, a single trait is not going to be of much help, especially if you are thinking of it in hypothesis, like when you say, oh, drought tolerance or insect resistance by producing maybe toxins inside. That would be a sustainability criteria. I feel what needs to be proven here is that the plant that has been altered, no matter with the previous genetic modification techniques or with the modification technique we are talking about here, genome editing, it needs to be tested in the fields, whether it actually has the capacity to give sort of a resilient response to the various stress factors in climate change, which could be drought, which could be cold, which could be flooding, which could be lots of pests. And in fact, if you look at it, it's quite interesting. We heard in the introduction about the longing or the wish to have a higher production and still, of course, be friendly to biodiversity and enable biodiversity. And if you look at innovation in the right way, for example, if you do, like scientists have done, for example, they mixed wheat with faba beans, and they found if you do it in the right proportion, you spare actually 25% of the land. Or if you do, for example, root crops and do them with onions, they had like 1.5 the outcome in production. So you see, like, yes, you might want to go for a trait, but that will at the end give very little and keep the plant vulnerable, or you can go for a system, and that would enable much more. So therefore, the criteria for sustainability, they cannot just be theoretical according to a trait, but the plants would need to be tested and checked that they can indeed deliver what they're supposed to.
Yeah.
Fully agree.
Yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying about how this is part of a big system and not just about a single something that one plant or one crop can deliver. And I did have a few questions, so we will come back to that. However, when it comes to traits, I think maybe there are already. I would like to ask if there are already certain that can be ruled out. One of the big critiques, I guess, from the critics of NGTs is they want to know if there are some traits that would not be considered sustainable. Herbicide tolerance is a big one. I would like to ask perhaps, the Commission first, but also Dr. Steinbrecher. Is this a rule breaker? I see that there's this database where the public can see how many NGTs are currently being developed, and out of hundreds being developed, there's fungicide resistant, there's disease resistant, but there's also herbicide resistant. About 49 are being developed for herbicide resistant by a number of companies throughout the world. So will these developments have a place in the EU from the point of view of the European Commission? Are you still assessing whether herbicide resistant can be accepted in the framework that you're working on?
I suppose the question is for me,
yes,
Gabriela,
yes,
right? Yeah.
I would like
so,
to.
I mean, before answering your question, let me first react to Ricarda's statement. And I very much agree with a lot of what she said. I mean, the NGT and individual new traits alone are not the solution. I mean, for everything, we fully agree, but they can contribute. They can contribute in a more systemic approach. And as part of that, I mean, you know that last week we also proposed the revision of the Sustainable Use Directive, which will have important consequences in terms of farming and farming practices other than varieties and breeding and particular traits. And now very precisely and before I forget, a different system. So what Ricarda described of this intercropping and so forth, they all have their place. They all have their place in the future food system and in the endeavor to go towards more sustainability. And now to your very precise question, no, we would not think that herbicide tolerance is a trait that can be considered as contributing to sustainability. And maybe I'm leaning a bit out of the window here in saying it, but I say it nonetheless. Not only because it would go against very clear targets that the Commission pursues in the context of the Farm to Fork strategy, which is a reduction of 50% use and risk. And I want to emphasize the combination use and risk of pesticides. And hence traits that lead to, or that at least appear to lead to the use of more pesticides, and in this particular case herbicides, do not seem compatible with that ambition. Hence, for that one, I think we would, it's safe to say we would say no. But others, pest resistance, so plants that become resistant to certain fungi, for example, and therefore require less fungicides, I don't think that anybody could argue that that would not be a positive trait to be considered. And another example that comes to mind, and I think the speaker from Bayer, Mr. Terhorst, already mentioned it, if it is possible to create varieties that are able to get nitrogen via microorganism or via symbiosis or whatever other form, and thus avoid the need to use mineral nitrogen fertilizers, which have lots of problems starting from the supply of gas to the energy consumption that is necessary to produce them and possible water pollution afterwards resulting. I would argue that this could very well be considered as contributing to more sustainability of the food production system.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much for that clear answer. And so I guess the next question is how, in which way, how to articulate these techniques into the broader sustainability ambitions of the EU. And I guess here I would like to go to Dr. Steinbrecher. You spoke to make the link with what you were saying before. It's all part of a system. It's not an isolated, silver bullet solution. These techniques, they have been on the market for around 10 years already. The most prominent, since 2012, which is CRISPR-Cas, the one that is the most used by breeders at the moment. is it possible? Are we ready to deliver onto the market these drought, flood-resistant crops? These crops that the very concrete example that the buyer that Mr. Terhorst cited at the beginning. Gene-edited microbes who would be capable of reducing fertilizer use. How close are we in terms of the technical, feasibility of getting these techniques out there in the field and having them work in the way we would expect them to work?
Yes, thank you. It is of interest to look not just now at this idea of the trait in this case, but rather like, is it possible? And you're already sort of touching it in a way with how likely is it that we have drought tolerance or that we have stress tolerance? And these techniques, these new genetic modification techniques like genome editing, they are targeting certain sequences. And so they will try to, for example, shut down certain genes and hope that that will change a trait. Some traits are very simple and they might just be made up of largely one or two genes. But most traits are made up of the working together of many, many genes. It's like an ecosystem. And drought tolerance and stress tolerance is that indeed. So if you start changing the genes in that system, you usually do not just affect like one of the traits, but you affect a multitude of related traits. So that could be then affecting the root system. It could be affecting the size of the leaves. It could be affecting the pores of the leaf, whether they close or not. It could also be to reduce the production of the crop itself. So stress responses are very diverse. And with genome editing, as it is currently perceived as something that should have lowered regulation, if you want to have these stress tolerances, you need to go deep, deep inside and intervene deep in the ecosystem of the genes of a plant. So whether that would even be possible is not clear. It was attempted with the previous genetic modification techniques, which even could add genes to it, and even that was not able to do it. So I'm very doubtful. The other thing is, of course, everything needs to be tested and assessed. And we keep talking about the traits. Yet CRISPR-Cas, for example, it will also at times cut somewhere else. That's what we then call off-target effects. Then you basically have altered something you didn't want to alter, and the processes involved in it. There was just a recent publication actually on grapevine, which could show that, yes, there was an off-target effect, but not so often. But what really was there, a high level of background mutations that occurred, like in the thousands. So what do we do with those? We cannot just ignore them and keep thinking this tool will just do that and only that what we want. It will do more. And so therefore, this idea, we might have all these different traits, is just a bit thinking too fast. We need to really deal with the risk assessment. We need to deal also with the fact what of we are trying to do wouldn't be better done with other types of innovation rather than putting all eggs in one basket here and sort of steering the innovation that is definitely needed, but steering it in the wrong direction. But yeah, I mean, it will be quite a while until we understand what really needs to be changed if we want to use these tools, because we need to understand all the genes and the language of it first before we have predictability as a tool.
So yeah, it's going to be it's a very complex machine, a plant, and it, yeah, as you say, it's a
system, not just a machine.
Yes. And so if I understand what you're saying correctly, it's going to take a while still until we can sort of fully grasp the predictability of whether it's going to be doing exactly what we wanted to do in the fields and responding in the exact way that we wanted to. And so, and you touched on the question of risk assessment, which is another part of the discussion today that I will come to in a few minutes. But one other question that I wanted to ask, and this would have been interesting for our international speaker, Mr. Kearns, but maybe we can hear about it from you, is what is happening outside the EU. There's these techniques, as I mentioned, they've been around for about a decade now. CRISPR-Cas since 2012, if I'm not mistaken. I hope I'm not. And so what is happening outside in jurisdictions which aren't so tightly regulated as the EU? Have we seen any promising NGT applications coming to the market that can tackle these climate, yield, food security concerns that have been evoked? And why not? If regulation is not the problem, in the US and in Canada, these NGTs are very promoted. The UK also just pitched, but this is recent, so maybe this is not part of the question. But what are some promising applications that we can see outside the EU that are sort of going in this direction of improved sustainability? Open question for whoever wants to answer.
Oh, this was supposed to be answered by Mr. Kern. So, I'm only aware of the tomato that you mentioned in Japan that is actually already on the market, and I think some wheat with some soybeans in the US.
Soybeans, yeah.
But other than that, what the JRC found when it investigated for us, our Joint Research Center, the situation, it found that almost 70% of the ongoing research is in early R&D stage, about 27% in a more advanced, and indeed only a few percent of the ongoing work very close to commercialization or actual commercialization. So yes, for the moment, this is in many cases at an early stage of the development pipeline, but in a way that rhymes quite well with what Ricarda said, that there's also time necessary to develop an appropriate framework, in particular also for conducting an appropriate risk assessment. And therefore, I'm not particularly disturbed by the fact that the research and innovation in this area is not that close to putting masses of new crop varieties on the market, because then indeed having a system that's appropriate and ready to deal with them might not be so easy to put in place.
Yeah, okay. And Dr. Steinbrecher, do you want to come in there, or should I? Regarding, why have we not seen, I think you touched on it a little bit, it's really complicated to actually get the plan, but are any interesting developments out beyond the borders of the EU that you think show some promise in terms of sustainability?
I think largely it is as sort of both of you were referring to, it's early stages and it's not there. And I feel also like it is a biological system, and one cannot just turn a certain trait on or off. It is highly complex. And I mean, you were saying like this tool has been around since 2012, its discovery. That doesn't mean it has been around and used and tested. It's in constant development. At first, it has many off-targets effects. And so they're trying to get it to do that less and to try to get it to work in other plants. There is a lot of dream, a lot of ideas, a lot of visions out there, but the reality looks different. I think what it has been good for, though, is as a research tool. And we have learned quite a bit more with the help of CRISPR-Cas. Interestingly enough, also, it has told us that quite a number of our perceived truths actually were mere assumptions, and that they are not actually correct, whether it is about mutations and inheritance and evolution or some other points. I don't want to go into the details, but in that area, it has been very helpful.
To help us broaden our understanding of a plant genome, for example. Okay. Thanks. Well, you were discussing the issue of embracing this, or seeing this rather, as a system. You said, let's not put our eggs in one basket. And I saw Mr. Behrens say, we don't have our egg, we are not putting all our eggs in one basket. So this brings us to quite nicely into the subject of coexistence with other types of agriculture. And then we can go into, labeling, tracing, risk assessment. So Mr. Behrens, you said we are not putting all our eggs in one basket. You've said also on the Commission has said this is one element of our plan for broader sustainability. So could you tell us a little bit about, when it comes to other markets in the EU, the organic farming market, for example, which the Farm to Fork strategy also wants to boost up to 25%. How does the Commission envisage coexistence there? How would you protect the organic sector, which has a lot of concerns about the arrival of these NGTs and really wants them to be traced, labeled as strictly as GMOs currently are?
Yes, we know that. We know that traceability, labeling, detection to begin with are big concerns for many of our stakeholders. And it's actually one of the reasons why the current requirements were found not to be fully fit for purpose, because it is so difficult, or at the moment, from what we hear from our reference laboratories, even impossible to detect certain of these modifications or prove that they have been done with the new genomic techniques and have not occurred naturally or via conventional breeding. So we are very much aware of this desire. And as I said, the Commission, and you said it just a few minutes ago, in the Farm to Fork strategy, the Commission has also committed to expand organic agriculture to 25% of the agricultural land. So obviously, whatever we propose and whatever we intend to do needs to be compatible also with that target. So yes, a system or finding solutions to keep the coexistence of organic agriculture with conventional agriculture, as we have already today. I mean, also today, this needs to be kept separate. And then in addition with GMO or in the plants created with with NGTs is important and will definitely be addressed in the proposal that the Commission might make. And it's certainly among the issues that we examine now very carefully and very closely in the preparatory work for the impact assessment.
Yeah. Dr. Steinbrecher, Mr. Behrens, you said that there are some changes that are brought on by NGTs that can be so similar to the ones that occur naturally that they cannot be detected. Do you agree with this? This is one of the big debates, I guess, of the current, about what's happening with NGTs. Are there some changes that indeed we could not detect, and then therefore potentially we could not label? And what is your view on that point?
Thank you. Yeah. Basically, we are talking here about mutations, and mutations, of course, I mean, mutations are small or large alterations of the genetic sequences. So it could be that one letter is changed for another, or you have a small deletion, a small addition, or you can have big parts missing or moved around. So all of these things, of course, do occur in nature. I mean, fire occurs in nature. That doesn't mean that fire per se is every time all right, so it depends where it is, when you use it, etc. So that for me is a criteria for neither for safety nor for the labeling issue, because you usually, with using these methodologies, you will change more than what you just intended. So there will be a so-called footprint in it, and that you can detect. So you need then to, not like in the past, like with the previous GM, for example, know what has been inserted. You just need to then understand what has been changed additionally. Or if you, for example, like with these new techniques, you can change the same gene like on 5-6 different chromosomes at once. Well, that also wouldn't occur in that way in nature, but individual mutations might, but not in that setting in that so that you can detect. So there is a number of different methodologies that you can use in order to detect and show that something is modified. And it is also in a certain background genome that would be probably like already a plant that would be used by that seed producer beforehand. So if then these changes are in that, this certain fingerprint, then you're also clear what it is. So it should be possible easily to detect them.
Okay.
But we shouldn't forget that in the beginnings of GM, old GM, there was also that notion saying like, we cannot detect it. And it took quite a while to develop and standardize the detection methodologies, and this will just be the same again.
And that's very good. That's very good to hear. That's very good to hear, Ricarda, because ultimately we definitely share that interest to develop the methods that are necessary. And I listened very carefully to what you said about the footprint and all that. That's good. And I mean, our research, our reference laboratory and the network that we have with the member states laboratories and also academic research will be very welcome in this regard. And maybe one little compliment. It's not only the detection methods that will help traceability. There are also other ways of ensuring that, such as we have maybe possibilities via blockchain. We are following entire production chains from the field, from the actual plots, and then from the seed that the farmer put into the plot to the intermediaries and the final producers and so forth and so on. So there can be more than only the analytical detectability to help ensure traceability.
So is it fair to conclude from this that both the Commission and Dr. Steinbrecher, that you both think that whatever crops come out of NGT applications in the near, far future should be labeled as NGTs? Would this be applied to all of the crops that come out of these applications? In your view, should it?
Ricarda, do you want to go first?
Sure, I can. I was hesitating even with nodding upon that question, because your question was, should they be labeled as NGTs? And what are NGTs?
Or rather, the question was, should they follow the same strict labeling and tracing requirements as current GMOs to ensure, the transparency with consumers, but also to protect, to respond to what the GM-free and organic markets want?
But also it is a very new technology. It's not out there in the field yet. So we really need to keep an eye on it also from the scientific and safety perspective. So yes, I fully sort of agree with they need to, yes.
Mr. Behrendt from the Commission, do you think that
you can also call me Dr. Behrendt.
Okay, that will be easier. Okay, great.
Just for the record.
Two doctors.
So, no, I mean, we are very much listening to our stakeholders here. And if the desire is to have appropriate labeling or very specific labeling in that regard, then that is certainly something that we will consider to put in the proposal. And how exactly that will look like and under which conditions and so forth will then have to be decided in the end by Council and Parliament. But if the wish of the majority of the stakeholders, which it seems to be, that there is a clear identification of food produced from such plants, or from plants that have been generated via these techniques, then that is something that the Commission will definitely listen to.
Okay. Do you think then that there are, because I think in the input that our sponsor Bayer gave to the input assessment by the Commission, they suggested a separate sort of track for NGT labeling, which would be similar, which would present similar changes to the ones that could potentially occur in nature. Is that something that the Commission would consider?
Again, I cannot preempt already the outcome of our preparatory work. And the question of should there be something separate for modifications that could also occur via traditional breeding, or, and Ricarda mentioned that in vitro mutagenesis, which is exempted from GMO, can lead to many, many more changes. And should bigger modifications get a different type of labeling? All to be examined. At the moment, we don't have a definitive position on that yet. But I would also pick up on something that Ricarda said, that all of this is very new at the moment, and consumers are probably not very familiar with NGTs as compared to GMOs or as compared to classical breeding. So more information and education and providing background about what it is and how they have been assessed. We come back to that question that Ricarda also mentioned, that we need an appropriate risk assessment depending on how big the modification has been, etc., etc. Yeah, there is a need for more education and information about this, definitely also.
Mm.
Could I just
Yes.
jump in, because Klaus just said like what I had supposedly said, and it's not quite that. NGTs, we shouldn't forget, are GMOs, right? They are part of that. So currently they are and should be labeled as such. I was not saying that it would be appropriate to say, like, to assess them according to the size of the mutation, because we know a single point mutation can be quite drastic, and a bigger loss of a part of the sequence might lead to nothing. So size does not really, is not an issue here in terms of the impact. So, you know, this appropriate risk assessment, it means like we need a full and sound risk assessment until we understand what might be, need to be assessed stronger, because it's in an area of the genome it previously could not be altered by the conventional methodologies, or are there certain areas where it might actually be quite, you know, risk-free? We don't have that information yet. Mm-hmm. So therefore, also the idea, I think, that the Commission had put forward with, is it proportionate risk assessment? I would not know what actually proportionate would mean. Proportionate to what? To the number of changes, to the number of base pairs, proportionate to, but maybe we can hear about that a bit more.
Yeah, actually, it's good that you touched on this, because I think it's the last point that I would like to address before we jump into the audience questions, of which we have many. So risk assessment. Dr. Steinbrecher, you have just said that, yeah, what is the Commission thinking about in terms of risk assessment? Maybe I could ask you, what would you like to see in terms of risk assessment? What do you think would be an appropriate risk assessment framework for for approving these techniques for them to come into the market?
Happily. I feel like anything that has been properly assessed, you know, has then a chance, but it needs that assessment. And currently, there is no reason to make any changes in terms of how GMOs are treated so far, because we have no experience with these. We don't have a history of safety. And so once we are maybe 10 years down the line with experience in the field, after they have been assessed according to the current regime, then we can think and evaluate and see, like, might be there a way that is better, or you know. But until then, I mean, the EU has subscribed to the precautionary principle, and that means if there are risks, we have to really ensure that we avoid the impact. So that means we need, in this case, the proper risk assessment.
Is that something that,
Fully agree. And sorry if I misquoted or misstated what I thought I heard you say, Ricarda. That was really not my intention. But indeed, I mean, we don't have the definitive answer yet for that either. And we've just asked EFSA for further advice on how risk assessment methodologies and data requirements could be differentiated. So on the basis of which criteria. And among them, for example, the novelty of a trait, for example, could certainly be one pleading for more expansive risk assessment and requirements, including testing, field testing, as Ricarda mentioned. But if, for example, a change has been made that is proven to have also occurred in conventional breeding, then maybe we are in the safer waters already. So Again, the definitive answer for that is not out there yet, but we have asked EFSA for further advice, and we trust that they consult and bring us this advice in an appropriate manner.
So are you saying in that then, sorry to jump in, I was saying in that then that you are only looking in this then as at the trait level and not at the level of other impacts, either indirectly through the trait, because the trait might be involved or the gene might be involved in other mechanisms, or like process-induced changes? Are you just putting them all aside and not looking at them?
No.
That is how it sounded. So
yeah, no, but that was not my intention, and I must apologize that I might not be as articulate as you in these scientific issues. But no, definitely indirect effects, for example, will not be discarded. No.
Okay. We have a little bit around 10 minutes now, and I think it's a good time to bring in some questions from the audience. There are many. Unfortunately, there are a lot of anonymous ones, so I will try to prioritize the ones where we have a name and an organization. So we have Bill Wirtz from the Consumer Choice Center, who asks, with England tabling legislation to allow NGTs and countries such as the US and Canada far ahead of us, can Europe afford being an island on gene editing? So, and to that I would add, can it afford? And how would it manage it in terms of trade, in terms of the impacts also on wider biodiversity? To make it spice it up. Maybe the Commission can reply here, and Dr. Steinberger, you can.
Well, I'm not sure that what is meant with afford in this context, quite frankly.
It's difficult to interpret. Is it a good idea that Europe becomes an island?
If it is, can we have enough agricultural production without it? In that sense, I would say the answer is probably yes. But do we want to be left behind, in inverted commas? If that's the perspective, that's another matter. And here, by doing the work that we are doing, I think we have given the signal that we want to be part of this process. But ultimately, as I explained, the final word on that will be by Council and Parliament when we table a proposal.
Wouldn't it also be to say, like, can we afford not to do the risk assessment, because biodiversity is already at such a devastated situation. It's continuously further collapsing, and climate change also isn't getting better. Can we afford to make more mistakes by not paying attention to what we are releasing? So I feel once we know things are fine and they go through the criteria, as the Commission says, like they are sustainable, whatever that means. But if it is sustainable and resilient according to how we would understand it, then there should not be a problem. But I mean, to just say like open doors and let it go, no, we cannot afford that risk.
Agree that we cannot. But Ricarda, you will also agree that virtually at the moment, there's virtually no cultivation of GMOs in Europe, and yet we have the loss of biodiversity. So I don't think it's totally fair to associate biodiversity loss directly with GMO cultivation.
It was not with GMO cultivation. It is actually with agriculture. And if we, for example, use this methodology to further go down the track with monoculture, which inevitably always invites more pests and more diseases. If we go with this kind of innovation down the track towards sort of an unsustainable agriculture, then I feel it doesn't matter. You are right, whether it is the GMOs or whether it is sort of conventionally bred. We need to change the agricultural system, and in which from what I have heard so far, like with the previous GM generation and probably with this now as well, it is actually trying to cater for the current agricultural model. And that is where we also have to rethink.
Agreed. And again, the crop and the seeds are one component in that. How you use them and whether we go for a different form. I mean, as I heard you say in the beginning, intercropping. that's also possible with NGT seeds. It doesn't have to be only conventionally bred seeds.
I'm going to jump in with another question from the audience. It's an anonymous person who's asking this. How would we make sure that traceability also applies to imported foods? Oh, I lost it. That's the gist of the question. How to apply traceability to imported foods if we go forward with it.
Well, there, of course, ideally, actual detection methods, laboratory detection methods would be the best solution, absolutely. And I take heart in Ricarda's statement that it will be possible at some point. And I heard that at an event that I attended, when was it, about 2 weeks ago? Yeah, exactly 2 weeks ago. A researcher from Norway presented her work also saying the same. So that's, of course, the gold standard, to be able to detect it in the lab. But as said, there are other ways when it comes to traceability, which, when we talk about imports from third countries, might have one more step of complication, but not impossible either, because we need to the traders anyway today in the European food system need to be able to trace very well where they source things and to whom they supply things all along the chain.
Are there any international standards to define this sort of traceability? There's another question which touches on that. Who would define it? How do we agree on these standards? How do we define this traceability system? Is there anything out there, Dr. Steinbrecher, that is capable of stepping up to that task internationally?
Well, so far they are still regulated as GMOs, and therefore they fall under that category, and that is internationally regulated. You are right, some countries are trying to find ways around it. Those who are under the illusion, I would like to say that this is has got much more potential than I think it will ever have, this technology. But the other thing is also there is a strong request from various agencies, including also in Canada, that are saying these crops, they should all be registered. There should be a database, and that database would need to have sufficient information in it and what has been altered and which background, so that actually one would know what to look out for. Because even with the current GMOs, if you don't know which crop might be modified and with what, you also cannot easily detect it. So it needs actually this communication between different countries, authorities, and as Klaus was just referring to, I mean, like there is standard practice, and if there is a database going with that, and one knows what has been altered, it should be not that difficult to detect it.
Sounds very good. I can fully concur with that, Ricardo. Also.
Okay. Well, I think that's all about all the time we have. Maybe we can look at the results from the poll to see what viewers thought. If it can pop up on the screen. Or maybe we have a few moments to take another question.
Could I just make another comment earlier? It sounded to me in the very beginning, there was the opportunity given to voice an opinion of which, like 3 versions of which kind of crop one would like the most, or has the highest expectations for. Mm-hmm. But what would you answer, for example, or how do you judge the answer that comes back if one actually feels like that is not the right way of making those traits or those kind of system responses happen? So I felt like earlier, like if I'd be there and I would have these 3 questions in front of me, I could not tick any of them. But what do people do in that case?
Maybe Mr. Barron, do you have an answer for this question?
No, I think she meant your Slido. She meant your Slido questions, Gabriela.
Oh, I'm sorry. They haven't popped up on the screen yet. This is the poll that was presented to us by Bayer, who organized this. We can see that the biggest expectation that respondents to the poll have for new genomic techniques is that they reduce the environmental impact of agriculture, which I think we can all agree is a top concern at the moment. And yeah, we will be watching the European Commission and awaiting with impatience to see what kind of framework it proposes for these new NGTs. I think the takeaway from today, it has been a very interesting discussion in which we have learned more about what's out there, what can be done, what are the difficulties in getting it to do what we want it to do, and what are the different interests and wishes from all of those involved or impacted by them. I thank very much both Dr. Behrendt and Dr. Steinbrecher for joining in this conversation and for answering all of my questions. Thank you very much for the audience, to the audience for joining. I am sorry that I couldn't take all of the answers. There's a whole lot of them, and it's tricky to juggle all of these things, but thanks very much for the interest. And yeah, we will be speaking very soon through Political Life. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.